Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Whenever I hear these gorgeous words from Scripture, my body automatically inhales sharply and then relaxes into a long, slow, delicious exhale. It's the most wonderful feeling, the feeling of being given rest, of being given permission to rest. Because rest is not easy for most of us, whether physically or mentally or both. We tend to lead exceptionally busy lives. Busyness is next to godliness or something like that. The Protestant work ethic infects us all to one degree or another. In the US, we don't really seem to believe in Sabbath. Not real Sabbath, at least. Not Sabbath that actually refreshes and restores. Not Sabbath that reorients us to the true nature of our restful and rest-giving God. Now, Sabbath, importantly, is not primarily a form of self-care, that quasi-religious concept popularized in recent years. Of course, taking care of ourselves is important, but self-care can so easily become self-indulgence, pure escape from the world rather than restful immersion within it. Rather, to better understand Sabbath, I take my cue from the eminent biblical theologian Walter Brueggemann. Brueggemann reminds us that the God of Israel is precisely the God who brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. God's Sabbath commandment, therefore, is inextricable from the entire liberatory narrative of the book of Exodus. Indeed, the God who rests is the God who emancipates from slavery, from the work system of Egypt and from the gods of Egypt who legitimated that work system. So when Jesus talks about rest, when Jesus talks about an easy yoke, he is hearkening back to the collective memory of the Exodus, the memory of the liberation from slavery that is foundational to the story of the Jewish people. Jesus is proclaiming his participation in an ongoing story of liberation from all forms of oppression. Not just from the taskmasters back in Egypt, but from anything and everything opposed to humans living at peace with one another and with creation. And what is more damaging to the possibility of living in peace, to the dream of the peaceable kingdom, than our devotion to insatiable production and productivity? Than our subservience to a market ideology which summons endless desire and needs that are never met, but that always require yet greater effort. We forget that we are inheritors of a deep lineage of freedom. We are children of a God who heard the despairing fatigue of the slaves in Egypt, a God who resolved to liberate the slaves from that exploitative system, and a God who recruited Moses for the task of human emancipation. We forget at our peril that this is our lineage too. That our God is fundamentally and explicitly attentive to the cries of those left behind, committed to opening up their futures by facilitating an exit from systems of restlessness and into the restfulness of neighborliness. As inheritors of this legacy, how might we participate in exiting systems of restlessness too? How might we begin to live into a more restful way of being for our own sake and for the sake of the world? Judaism, of course, remains much closer to the practice of Sabbath than most Christian traditions. And Judaism has many helpful practices that might offer some possibilities for our own engagement with Sabbath. Havdalah is a Hebrew word that means separation, and it's the name of the ritual that marks the end of Shabbat on Saturday evening. Shabbat means Sabbath, separating it from the start of a new week. It's a beautiful ritual used both in the synagogue and at home. It's a brief ceremony that uses 4 elements to mark the moment when Jews say goodbye to the beauty of Shabbat and pledge to carry its gifts into the week to come. Here's what happens. We drink from a cup of wine, which symbolizes the joy we experience on Shabbat. We pass a spice box full of cinnamon or another sweet-smelling spice, which symbolizes the lingering scent of the sweetness of Shabbat. We light a multi-wicked candle, which symbolizes how our busy, separate selves come together on Shabbat. The light, the wine, the spices all come together to help us carry Shabbat with us through the week until the next Shabbat. We extinguish the candle into the wine to conclude the ceremony as a final moment of goodbye to Shabbat. With the singing of Shavua Tov, we wish each other a good week to come and long for a day when Shabbat won't need to end at all. So simple, so beautiful. A way to mark time, to create a container for a commitment to rest, resting not just for self, but for the sake of the world. For without an end, it is quite difficult to begin. Without ritual, we so easily forget that there is another way to live, because to rest is not without risk. At the beginning of Shabbat, one prayer book offers these words: "This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over?" Indeed, those who keep the Sabbath holy often end up living all 7 days quite differently, because the Sabbath changes us. Indeed, Sabbath is not simply a pause, but a reorientation. Sabbath is an opportunity to imagine a way of life that is not animated by coercion or competition, but rather oriented toward compassionate solidarity. Indeed, according to the directives of the book of Exodus, we are to give our workers Sabbath, we are to give our animals Sabbath, we are to give creation Sabbath. And were we to collectively stop and rest in this way, the ensuing delight, the ensuing freedom just might upend business as usual, just might change our hearts. In many ways, the pandemic has done some upending. The Black Lives Matter movement has done some upending. But the power of the way things are is strong. And it's difficult to catch our breath for long enough to really dream our way into something different. But what if catching our breath became a fundamental and ongoing commitment of our spiritual lives? What if we really learned to stop, not just for our own healing, but for the healing of the world? This is what many of us have been beginning to learn under the tutelage of Jacob Given in the contemplative prayer series he's been leading on Monday nights. What does it mean to stop for 15 to 20 minutes twice a day, to actively consent to God's presence and activity in the silence? Sabbath then seems even more challenging, inviting us to rest for an entire day, to rest in a way that gives space to our imaginations, to rest in a way that gives creation time to breathe, so that creation might continue to give us breath. Come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest, a gift of freedom, freedom for one and for all. May it be so.